What's up, guys? Welcome to another part on how to write your first custom indicator with Tradovate or the TSTrader platform. Today we're not going to get into the indicator just yet. We're going to go over a couple things that we talked about last time and just fill in some more details. Let me go ahead and pull up our indicator. All right. So what we have here is our SMA that was automatically generated for us from our demo code. Let me go ahead and open it up. There was a request to make the font bigger, so I'm hoping this works. I normally run the platform on a desktop, and it's the same code as the web, but you're unable to zoom in and zoom out when you're on the desktop Electron app that they've put together. So hopefully this will be a little, let me see the preview. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we had talked about a couple things last time that I kind of want to go over a little bit some more. We talked about the require statements, how we're able to reuse functionality from a different file, or if we want to create, say, helper files, so that way we don't have to write things, or copy the code in multiple versions of our indicators or different indicators. We don't have to copy, let's say, the SMA functionality here. The other thing I want to touch on is the init. I don't think I kind of explained a little bit or explained clearly what you would want in there. And then the last one we'll look at is also the console output again. Something a little bit new with that. Okay, so let's go with the easy stuff. The console, or actually the init. So the init is where you want to define or to initialize something. So that's where init comes from, is to initialize. As I mentioned before, you can initialize or define your variable. So if you want to say flag equals, default value, which is true, or better yet, let's say I want my default, date to be equals the current date when this indicator is loaded in the Tradovate, ecosystem, the code ecosystem. I only want to generate the date value. We could call it start date just once. If we do it down here, every time the data gets updated, map gets called by the Tradovate platform, and you would overwrite your date value or your start date value. So again, if you define it up here, it will only happen once. Now there is a workaround. If you wanted to go, if this dot start date is equal to undefined, meaning I have not yet set it or done anything with it, just do it once. So you can do it this way as well. And this will assure that the start date is only set once. And then if you did that, you no longer need this line of code there. Personally, I like to initialize code up here most of the time. Sometimes you have to do this kind of construct where you're doing it in your main recurring code. It's not ideal because, like I mentioned before, if you do it at the init, people will know to come here and you say, keep track of the start date so we can do time lapse comparisons or something of that sort. You can add notes that people can, as your code base gets bigger, a couple hundred lines or so, you can kind of reference this. Of course, start date is that's another thing about variable naming and naming in general. If you name it correctly and concisely, it should be self-describing and you shouldn't need comments. But other times you do, because if you had multiple dates or multiple start dates, that kind of stuff. All right, so that's the init. One way we can test this is that you can do console.log or output. So with the console open, again, you go to view console output, make sure it's checked and clear console to get rid of whatever's there. What we can do is we can output debug statements, basically. This is there's not really a great debugger for the Tradovate, code platform. And you can't really take this code and write it somewhere else because you need all the dependencies that an indicator needs. You need all the require statements. Like predef is definitely something you want, and it's used down here and so forth. And so it's hard to lift and shift and write this somewhere else in an editor that will do more for you. So that's one of the drawbacks, I think, of Tradovate itself, is to it has a limited code editor. IDE is not much of an experience. It's basically a text editor. All right, now that that's soapbox is out of the way, what we can do is, I'm going to go ahead and remove that for now. What we can do is we can write out, so this statement console.log and then a string. That will print out things into the console down below. So you could say setting the start date here, and then you can also say console.log start date is, and of course you can append, you can, so the first one is just a string. The second one is string concatenation, where you're kind of creating a longer string by adding using a plus sign. I won't go over too many more of the JavaScript nuances and syntax. We'll talk about that in a little bit at the end of this video. But so if I want to say, the start date now has been set to that value, and that'll just print out the string um, of that. And on the else, for now, we don't have to print out anything. That'll just clutter things up. I guess the only other thing we can do is, well, I'll just leave it out for now. So if I save, file save, or command save if you're on a Mac, the console will display this string and then this string right after it. Control S. And now if I scroll down, you can see all the things that it's loading, and I don't want to say compile, but put it into its code base. You can see down here at the very bottom, it says setting the start date. It sets the start date and then it reads it out. And it happens to be December 1969, 5 p.m. I made a mistake there. I put a 0 right there, which means 0 seconds. It takes a millisecond since epoch, which is a Unix time thing. So that started at epoch, basically, somewhere near there. So what we're going to do is go ahead and clear the console again, and then we're going to remove that, and then I'm going to save the file, Command S, and then it should get loaded. Here we go. It's a little bit slower on the browser versus the desktop doing it, because I think the source is uploaded to the cloud, and then it actually gets processed and so forth. That's my guess. So again, we have the start date, and then we print out the start date for this indicator is 10/29/26, which is my current time, Mountain Daylight Times, and so forth. So that's how you can use the console.log to kind of debug your code. And you'll kind of want to, as you're doing more complex algorithms, the console.log is very useful to do that. Again, it's kind of a, I don't want to say a hackish way of debugging code, but it is not what I do at my normal job. I write Java code during the day, and IntelliJ, my IDE of choice, has a much better experience for the developer. But this works just fine. I'll go ahead and remove that, and clear the console, and then save. You can leave the console.log in there, I think, but I like to just comment it out. I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes with Tradovate, if it's printing that out to some console somewhere, and that's just a wasted work that I don't want to burden my platform with. All right, so we haven't done anything else to the code just yet. I'll remove that. Okay, let's talk about these require statements. The first one, the predef, it has a bunch of utilities, and the way you would find that, so the first dot just says in the same directory as where my file is located. Go down one directory or find a subdirectory called tools and then a file called predef.js or just predef. Yeah, predef.js in this case. Same as this one. The single dot says stay in the same directory as my current file, which is the top or root level file that you can see, which is right here. Then find a subdirectory called tools, and then find a file called sma.js. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, same directories I'm currently in. Then I'm going to find this first subdirectory called tools, and then I'm going to find predef.js. Now you can't actually create files in the tools. This is provided to you by the Tradovate platform. But this is one way for you to say include the EMA and graphics. We'll go into that in the next part. We'll use this. There's other, so you can peruse through or browse through here. I don't know what to peruse. Well, yeah, you just kind of browse through these folders to see what you can use. I haven't really used the built-in. I think this is a new folder for their whatever thing that they just added that allows you to put multiple indicators or reuse indicators and so forth. I'll have to play with that a little bit more, but I'll close that up. And actually, I think you can use the built-ins. Let's say if you want to do Bollinger Bands, you could import the B bands and then it just takes some data inputs, but let's not talk about that. Okay. Sorry for the tangent. So here's the predef file that we had talked about from our demo3.js file. It's another JavaScript file. It too imports or requires additional helper methods, from these files, meta.js, which is in the same. So in this case, require. So it says in the same directory as me, and we're under tools right now. You import meta.js, and from meta.js only extract the param type export. So if we go to meta, I don't know what this is going to take or what rabbit hole it's going to lead us down, but meta.js and it's module export. So it's exporting all these. This is this is a object with multiple properties called number and string values associated with it. And we only want to grab the param type out of that. And so if we go back to predef, that's what we do. So this is a construct that says, because require will export a bunch of things. We only want param type. And that's what that means. And then we can reuse param type down in the code. So this is the predef file. If I search param type, so it's just used by this. It's not using meta. Oop, I can't modify this. But if I could, I would type, if I hadn't specified this and just called it, let's say meta, you say like this is Lodash, you can say constant meta equals this, and then wherever you need it, you can just go meta dot param type. Again, it would just reference the same names as these. All right, enough JavaScript talk. So predefs, itself is exporting an object which has functions in them and properties. So it exports some plotters. Yeah, this is where JavaScript. I'm not a JavaScript expert. I don't do JavaScript for my day job. I kind of run away from JavaScript most of the time. Writing indicators on Tradovate has forced me to live with JavaScript. I'll just say that. So these are all functions, anything that has a name and open parentheses, close parentheses, those are functions. Obviously returns, signify functions, but, excuse me, you can also have properties with them. So it defines the plotters, which has a line property, and so forth. I'm not going to go into much more detail except to say that we use, things like param specs when we do trying to take input from the user. We'll call the predefs, we'll take the param specs. We'll either use the period function, the number function, the percent function, the Boolean. And it's good to know at least these because the param specs they're helpers in terms of allowing you to filter out what or how the input, the user provided customized input should behave. You can set, the steps of how when you're up and down the, not drop down, but the other thing that goes up and down. This tells you the increments of one each time, gives you a minimum value that the user can set and so forth. So period, number, they're almost the same. This one takes initial value, the default value, the step, and the min. So you got period, number, and then you also have percent. And percent is the one I use most of the time because it's the most configurable. I normally will set a default. I always set a default. I normally set a step, min, and a max. And this helps you kind of control your indicator's behavior. So you have to do less code checking, because you don't have to write if the provided period is less than this, don't do anything kind of checks in your code that you could do. All right, so there's others like Boolean is true, false, text. This actually does not work. I've tried it. Enum. So the one that we'll be concerned with is percent. So just remember this percent. We might reference it one more. So we'll do one more thing to our indicator. And this video is running long, but I hope you find it somewhat useful to be able to navigate through what Tradovate provides and then how to work with it. And if you ever get curious, you can always come here. The other thing I'm going to suggest is going to GitHub repository here. So if you'll see, I clicked community from the Code Explorer and type or hit GitHub repository. Opens up a new browser window to the Tradovate documentation. This documentation is okay. Many of you have probably seen it. Come here and kind of walk through things. There are some bugs in it, not a lot, but there's also not a lot of details in it as well. For instance, the params is kind of I think what we looked into a little bit. So I'll reference this moving forward as well. Let me go back here and we'll close this. Actually, we'll go back to our file, which is thankfully at the top. All right, so we've included predef and we use the period function. If you remember, there was another one called percent that takes 4 parameters. There's a default of 14, and then we'll want to step it up by 1. We'll have a minimum, let's say you can't have any less than 1 period, and you can't have any more than 20 length period in your for this particular indicator for whatever reason. We're going to go ahead and save that, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit and remove it from this second one here, and let's just remove it from here as well. Okay, nothing else changes from our last time. I'm going to close the source. Oops, too much clicking. Okay, so what we'll need to do, so whenever you make a change to the code, but you've already, especially the input parameters that's available, you kind of have to remove it or at least close it and then open it again in order to see the change. Sometimes you do have to, like I said, remove it completely and re-add it because it stores the state of when the last time the indicator was used and open. Even though you made a change, it doesn't reload the code. I actually don't know. I'm not going to guess what's going on. So let me see. I will try to do 25, and it says, nope, you can't do 25. Right? Like if I want to go less than 1, it's going to let me go less than 1. If I want to go greater than 20, it won't let me because I've set that. Let me go and do one other thing in here. So if, now you wouldn't do it with this indicator, but if you wanted to, let's say increment by 1,000th or 1/10 of, whatever. So let's say you want to do ticks. You have a way to customize the number of ticks to do something with. And ticks for the NQ, or let's go with the worst case that I know of, that the RTY, the Russell. Let's say I want to define something that has, how many points should I default it to, let's say 1 point, but I can increment it in ticks, 1/10 of a point. And the minimum should be 1 and the maximum should be 5. And if I do this, and then I may have to remove, oops, so this is above my thing, so I'm going to remove it and just re-add it. It was above my threshold of maximum, so it defaults to 1. Now I can increment it by 0.5. I can't go below 0.0, but you'll notice it's a point, whereas when we had the full number, the period of when I had 14 and 1 comma 1 and 20, because the 1 itself was a whole number, it incremented by 1, whereas this incremented by a tenth of a point, because that's how we specified our step. If I was to change this to 0.25, it will allow quarter point tick increments or quarter point increments. And if I moved it back to 1, you'll see that actually I'm going to have to re-add it. You can, ooh, that's weird. I wonder why. Let me figure it out, because I don't want to lead you astray. Maybe I didn't save it, or it figures it out on its own. I actually don't know, but that's one way you can kind of force certain things. But let me change that back to 14 and 20. Oh no, the UI is a little bit slow, so I end up double clicking. All right, so that's, I'm guessing, I hope it doesn't stop at 5. If it does, that means, okay. So there's a reload issue, maybe with the server, because I'm using it from a browser. It probably has to, oh, shoot, I didn't notice my account information was exposed during this whole time. Yeah, it's okay, it's just a demo account. It's not a big deal. Just traded a little bit today on the demo. It looks like prices are dropping. All right, let's see. The last thing I want to cover, I know we're running long. It's already 22 minutes. Let's see if we can do it in the next 3 minutes. Is I want to show you how to learn a little bit more about JavaScript. So again, I've been coding for a long enough time. I can pick up a new language fairly quick and just have to Google, syntax differences between languages. But if you're starting out brand new and you don't know anything about coding, I would recommend, let's see, or one place that I have used in the past is free code camps. So just Google it or type freecodecamp.org. If you go there, you can sign up, but if you want to just try it out like we are right now, let's just scroll down and yeah, we'll scroll down and just get started with I you can just go through all of these. They're all JavaScript based except the ones that says Python, obviously. But let's pick the second one here, JavaScript algorithms and data structures. So from the home page, just scroll down and pick this, or sign in if you want to save, create an account and sign in if you want to save your progress. It's, you start with, it gives you a counter of how many lessons or tutorials. They're quick. There's 111 of them. You can probably go through about, I don't know, 25 of the first 25 or 30 in the first, I don't know, hour, maybe less, depending on how technically savvy you are. So like the first one, or the second one, declare JavaScript variables, talks about the different variable types there are, or in JavaScript. You saw me using undefined previously in this video. We've used strings. There's numbers involved. And then after you read that, it'll say, well, on the right-hand side, go ahead and type in an assignment. And the assignment will say down here, it'll tell you how to do something, and then it'll change the question enough for you just to, where you can't copy var our name, because that'll fail, right? If I just go var, actually I didn't read. It says use var keyword to create a variable called my name. Look at the our name example if you get stuck. So if I hadn't read that and I said var our name, and then I type run all tests, hey, it's going to fail. says you should declare my name with the var ending with a semicolon. Um, Obviously, it needs to be my name. So I could say my name, run all tests again, and it says you complete. And go to the next challenge. And then, same construct as the previous one. You just follow this and do their challenge. Near the end, click run the test, read the console output on the right to see if you succeeded or not. In the bottom left, it'll tell you what it was expecting and what may have gone wrong. So let's go back to the menu, curriculum. So yeah, again, the intro here says, it teaches you about OOP or object-oriented programming, a little bit of functional programming. Doesn't go over HTML and CSS, which is, more web specific technologies. I don't want to call them languages, but just, scripting and or styling, uh, script languages. Yeah, not programming languages, but whatever. JavaScript. Okay, so you want to learn JavaScript, start with that. And I think that video or this video has gone long enough. I haven't said it before. Please subscribe, hit the like button, bell the ring, all those good things. All right, we'll see ya.